Welcome back. Join me as I step into the shadows of an abandoned cabin deep in the woods, where every creak whispers a chilling secret. Tonight, I'll uncover the dark mysteries of Lantern's elusive guardian. If I can survive the night without letting fear take over, are you brave enough to explore the unknown with me? Story number 1, The Keeper of the Lantern. The woodland whispered stories about the abandoned lighthouse, whose existence in the deep woods, distant from any sea, was mysterious. For many years, residents spoke about the Lantern Keeper, a spectral being who is supposed to entice the unwary with an unearthly light before trapping them in a never-ending web. The mystery appealed to those who were looking for adventure, or stupidly risked fate, in spite of the warnings. 5 friends, Emma, Liam, Sophia, Noah, and Ava, made the decision to locate the famous lighthouse on a cold fall evening. They set out into the woods with flashlights, a map, and an unquenchable curiosity. Their laughing was blocked by the dense fog, which also created an eerie mood. "Are we sure about this?" Sophia, holding Liam's arm. Ignoring his own hesitation, Liam told her that it would be enjoyable. Consider it the ultimate ghost story. As they arrived at the clearing, the lighthouse stood tall before them. Its twisted spire and peeling paint glowed in a faint, fading light. Long shadows were formed across the ground by the strange light, which pulsed like a heartbeat. Even though she felt cold, Emma said, "It's beautiful." The door opened with a creak as they got closer. In the dim light, every breath was apparent, and the air felt cold. Their nostrils were filled with dust and rot, yet the lantern's light stayed constant, providing a comforting but ominous glow. An elderly guy wearing faded clothes stepped out of the darkness. The glitter of his eyes was unmistakable, keen, penetrating, and full of a terrifying understanding, even if his hood covered most of his face. He said, "Turn back," in a tone that was both a request and a warning. "The living do not belong here." Ever the disbeliever, Ava laughed uneasily. "Well done, old man. We are only here to observe." The lantern's light briefly faded as the man's hold on it tightened. "You've received a warning." Then he vanished like smoke in the wind. They ignored the warning and started exploring. The walls seemed to have a life of their own as the spiral stairway rose into the darkness. Every step creaked under their weight, echoing endlessly. With his habitual attitude fading, Noah whispered, "This place feels wrong." Emma warned, "Don't be such a baby," but her shaking palms betrayed her. Unusual occurrences started as they increased. Their ears were punctured by faint murmurs, faint but malicious. The lantern's light flickered just beyond their grasp, like if it were following them. Then suddenly Ava let out a scream. She was gone when they turned, and her broken flashlight was on the ground. The murmurs intensified, a chorus of tortured voices. As the other 4 rushed to locate Ava, panic broke out. Because of the architecture's inability to make sense, the staircase seemed to lead them in circles at every turn. Noah's time came next. With a voice that echoed constantly, he screamed bloodily and disappeared. "We must leave this place." With tears running down her cheeks, Sophia cried, "Just keep going." Despite his own obvious nervousness, Liam urged. As the light became brighter, brief glimmers of dark forms protruding from the walls were seen. Sophia staggered and fell into the darkness while Emma held on to Liam. Only silence remained when her cry was stopped. Emma and Liam, now alone, ran down the apparently endless stairs. The warmth of the lantern turned into a burning fire as it followed them. At last, they exploded through the front door and fell to the forest floor. They looked back, breathing deeply. Lifeless, gloomy, and silent, the lighthouse stood. Then it disappeared, leaving nothing but a barren clearing, like though it were letting out its last breath. Emma broke down in tears as Liam gaped in shock. The question hung in the cold air as he asked, "Where did it go?" A few days later, Emma woke up in bed to find an odd object on her nightstand. A little antique lantern with a dimly flickering flame. When she realized it was the same lantern the old man had been holding, she gasped. Faint murmurs restarted from within its radiance. She was not yet finished by the lighthouse or the lantern keeper. Story number 2, The Abandoned Cabin. An abandoned cabin was hidden in the forest, surrounded by a blanket of moss and twisted trees. Time and weather damaged its wooden timbers, and its windows were broken. The cabin was said to be cursed, a location where the lines between the living and the dead were blurred, and locals avoided the region. However, it was the ideal location for a weekend trip for a group of adventure seekers. 4 friends, Maya, Ethan, Clara, and Jake, set out on a clear October morning with backpacks and a map that showed the location of the cabin. They were fascinated by the local legends, particularly Ethan, who loved with recording urban legends for his YouTube channel. Maya adjusted her scarf and said, "It's just an old house. These stories are made up to keep kids away." With a hint of hesitation in her voice, Clara replied, "Or maybe there's some truth to them." Ethan smiled and held out his camera, saying, "In any case, it will make for an amazing video." Spooky season content is on the way. The trail was lengthy and twisting, with sunlight being filtered into unsettling patterns by the thick canopy above. The forest grew quieter as they went more in, as though the trees were holding their breath. They arrived at the clearing around late afternoon. The cabin, a reminder from a past period, loomed over them. With a gentle groan in the wind, the door hung open. As they got closer, a shiver went through the group. Jake's habitual attitude disappeared as he whispered, "This place is definitely creepy." Ethan, who was already filming, remarked, "Perfect for the video. Let's take a look." The air inside was musty and humid. The floor was covered in rotten planks and broken furniture. The walls were written with strange symbols whose meaning was unclear but unquestionably unnerving. Who made these carvings? As she ran her fingertips over the markings, Clara said. Though her voice lacked confidence, Maya added, "Probably just some bored teenagers." An odd chill descended upon the cabin as they explored. Faint whispers reverberated through the empty rooms, and shadows appeared to move in the corners. They thought it was the wind at first, but then the door slammed shut with a loud thud. What on earth was that? Jake's eyes were wide as he shouted. Maya replied, "Possibly it's the wind," but her shaking hands showed how afraid she was. Pulling Jake in closer, Clara said, "Wind doesn't slam doors or carve symbols." Ever the skeptic, Ethan kept shooting. "This is incredible. Continue rolling." The cabin got darker as darkness fell, its shadows growing more sinister. The murmurs increased in volume, and they were now clearly voices speaking a language that none of them understood. The beams of light from their flashlights faltered wildly. "We must depart," Clara insisted. "This isn't secure." However, the door refused to move when they tried it. Even though the windows were broken, they appeared to be impenetrable now, as though they were being held inside by some invisible force. Then Maya let out a scream. When the group turned around, they saw her gazing at a mirror that had appeared where none existed before. The room was empty, yet in its mirror, dark shapes loomed behind them. "We're not by ourselves," Maya muttered, panic struck. They clung close to one another, their terror increased by every groan and creak of the shack. Then there was a pulsing, unsettling light coming from the markings on the walls. The pals began to disappear one by one. The first was Jake. His frightened scream was interrupted by a darkness that enveloped him. With tears running down her cheeks, Clara held on to Ethan. "We must take action," she exclaimed, even when Clara's hands clutched at the wood before vanishing as she was dragged into the floorboards. Ethan's camera caught every moment. Ethan and Maya came last. With a trembling voice, Ethan stated, "We need to figure out a way out." "What's the point?" Maya answered, her gaze blank. "It will not allow us to leave." Ethan was not going to give up. In an attempt to break the camera, he bashed it against the door, but it did not move. The shadowy figures in the mirror were illuminated by the flare of the light in the middle of the room. Their shapes shifted and screamed as they closed in. Maya's last cry echoed through the cabin as she vanished into the darkness. As the shadows surrounded him, Ethan's camera, which was resting on the floor, captured footage. The light from the lantern flickered and then went out. In the area where the cabin used to be, hikers discovered Ethan's camera a few weeks later. Everything was captured in the video. The shadows, the blazing symbols, the whispering. The last minutes, however, were different. Low and far away, Ethan's voice could be heard saying, "If you're watching this, stay away." It's still out there. Like its victims, the cottage had disappeared into thin air. However, the legend remained, serving as a terrifying reminder that some locations are best left alone.